Hi, everybody. I'm Matt.
And I'm Steve.
And this is Marvel Reread Club. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Marvel Reread Club. And today we have a special guest. We have Bill Cairns, who we have been interacting with for years now because he runs the Facebook group Marvel. What is exactly the name of the Facebook group?
Marvel Comics Fans 1961 to 1986.
Yes. I'm a member of two different groups that have very similar names, but one goes to 86 and one goes to 89. Are you familiar with your rival that goes to 89?
Yeah, they started that one. They didn't like my group. They thought we were a little opinionated, so they kind of started their own. There's two other ones, actually, that kind of took the name. One goes to 89, and I think one goes to 91.
Okay.
Yeah, the one, I'm also a member of both of those groups, but the 81 to 89 one doesn't tend to be as fastidiously moderated, let's say. And so I really appreciate the work that you put into moderating that thing.
Thanks. It was tough there for a little while. There was like a year or two where everyone seemed to be fighting, and every other post was Stan versus Jack and this and that and everything. But then it seemed to calm down, and Emily Grace has been a big help because I was the only admin. And once it was like a tipping point of about 30,000 people. Once we got past that, I just couldn't keep up with everyone 24 hours a day. And things tended to get nasty after I went to bed finally. I think everyone knew when Bill went to sleep, they're like, oh, now we can be rude. So Emily Grace has really helped out with that.
So how did you come to have this Facebook group, Bill?
Well, it was facilitated by me losing my job that I had for about 18 years. And so I was just home a lot. And I noticed back in 2012, I think it was, there were a lot of scattered Facebook groups for one artist or a different artist. But there wasn't one just for Marvel Comics in total. There was a lot of separated ones. And I wanted to start a group for Marvel Comics, but I wanted to have one where I could join in the discussion, especially since we would only have like 10 or 15 members for the first couple of months. And I knew I stopped collecting like about 1988, I want to say. So I wanted to be able to join in the discussions and know what everyone was talking about. So I figured the 25th anniversary would be a good cutoff point. So I just made it 61 to 86. It took a long time to grow. It was pretty small in the beginning, but then I'd say about the third year, it took off all of a sudden like crazy. I don't know if Facebook put us on one of those, groups you may want to join things that they have or something. All of a sudden, they went from not that many to a ton.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's always tricky with Marvel Comics. And then the Marvel Age has been going for 63 years at this point. And we had Douglas Wolk on the show, and he did an amazing job writing a book about the entire history of Marvel Comics. Someone who believes that every era of Marvel Comics is equally great. He is someone who has, I kept trying to jump around and going like, well, surely you can't defend, this era of Marvel Comics or this decision Marvel made at one point or another. And he's like, no, here's why it's perfect. And I'm like, okay. But I feel like generally speaking, you have people who think that the current age of Marvel Comics is the best. You have people who think the 60s are the best, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s. I guess a few people maybe of the aughts and tens. And but you get different people depending on different eras. And, I talked to Douglas about how, for me, there's certain moments in Marvel history where I'm like, yeah, that freezes me out. Like when around Planet Hulk, where they announced that the Hulk had actually been killing hundreds of people over the years. and I'm like, well, this is not my Marvel Comics anymore. This is not the Marvel Comics, even though Planet Hulk was a great storyline and those are great comics. And I did go ahead and read them. But the whole impetus for that storyline, sending the Hulk off planet because they revealed that, like, oh, by the way, the Hulk has actually been killing people all this time. I'm like, not only is that a bad story, but that retroactively makes every Hulk comic a bad story.
Right.
Unless you go, that is apocryphal. Unless you say that didn't actually happen. That's not my comics. That's not my Marvel Comics. But the last thing you want to do is somebody going like, I liked Marvel Comics better when there weren't all these black people and when there weren't all these women writers and when there weren't all these. And that's the last thing you want to be. And you don't want to get in bed with those people. You don't want to be telling those people that they're right. But on the other hand, you want to be able to go like, here's my era. Here's the era that I prefer. Here's the era that I like. How do you thread that needle while running this website?
Well, the kind of signpost that made me not as much of a collector was Jean Grey coming back.
Yeah.
I was kind of like, oh, come on, and the way they did it, and with them having Cyclops leave his new wife and kids to go back with Jean.
Yep.
I was just like, pretty much, I'm out. But first of all, the question was asked about every other day back then. Why is it 61 to 86? And I would also say, that 86, not only was it the 25th anniversary, but there was Watchmen and there was The Dark Knight. And 86 seemed to be a big cutting off point to where comics were a certain way before 86. And then, not to use a cliche, but like everything kind of got dark and gritty after 86. Even characters that had no business being dark and gritty got, dark and gritty. And the artwork kind of...
Like Betty Brant, as Matt has pointed out.
Yeah, everyone got dark and gritty. It was a bit silly. I'm sure there was good stuff in 87 and 88. I probably read some of it because I was still collecting then.
But there's good stuff in 2024. Marvel is still publishing good comics today. But, this is, I think for most of your readers, this is just the Marvel comics of our youth, the Marvel comics of when we were kids for a lot of your readers. I'm sure some of it are kids today and they're just, they just like old stuff. But I just think it's
their hair and their clothes.
The Marvel comics comics that one is most nostalgic for. You don't have a manifesto in which you say that modern comics all suck.
Oh, no. I try to keep from saying that. I just say this is our time era. And that's it. I don't make a judgment call on anything after that. I try not to be, a jerk to artists or anybody that likes that kind of era. But I'll say, as admin, you get to see a little part of it called Insights, where you have all different stats on the members that you can see as the admin. And one of them is a bar graph of the ages of the members. And the bar graph from like 50 up is tremendously tall. The bar graph from like 18 to 26 is incredibly small. And the one over 50 is just like really, really tall. So it's basically people who grew up with those comics. You're correct. And even, there are a lot of people who collected them before I did. I was born in 1970, and there's people in the group who were collecting them as they came out. And there are definitely people in the group with way more knowledge of Marvel comic history than I have. I admit that. I'm not like some great scholar. There are people, the person in the group called Foster Coker, not to just call out one person, but there are people in the group who really, really know their Marvel stuff, but mainly for that era. And a lot of people stopped when I stopped, it seems like. Byrne left the company. A lot of people jumped ship in 86 that people had liked. Gene Colan left. John Byrne left. Frank Miller left. So there's a lot of people who actually did cut off around 86. Some of them cut off earlier. They'll be like, Marvel for me ended in 1977, or, Marvel for me ended in 1983.
So I tell you what, let's go ahead and get into discussing some actual comics here, if we could.
Okay.
So we should explain to the folks at home that we are reading the books of March 1967, a very good month for Marvel Comics for the most part. And we're going to have some great books and some not so great books to discuss today and get Bill's opinion on. So, let's go ahead and jump in with The Amazing Spider-Man number 46.
All right. So this is on the cover. It says, "Who says this isn't the Marvel age of vile new villains? You and Spidey are about to be jolted by the sinister Shocker." So the Shocker goes on to be, I'd say, a solid B-list Spider-Man villain. Would you say that's fair?
Yeah.
And he's got this interesting brown and yellow look with this kind of quilted pattern on him. So we start out, Spider-Man just happens to be out in the city, still with his, you were calling it a sling, but really this looks more like his left arm is taped to his body. But yeah, he's just hanging against a wall and suddenly, hey, something's vibrating. Of course, it's always a thing. It can't be an earthquake because we're in New York City. So it turns out that the Shocker is in there robbing some stuff. We meet the Shocker for the first time. He's got these, hammer vibration shock, vibro shock fist things of some sort.
One thing I really like about this issue is it really plays fair because, I'll go ahead and jump to the end. It turns out at the end that Spider-Man realizes he can stop the Shocker by webbing up his thumbs and keeping his thumbs from clicking his shock devices. And Ramita's really playing fair because you can see right away on page 2 that he has to use his thumbs to operate them. So it is not a shocker on the final pages of the book when Spider-Man is able to stop it. So I really give Ramita credit for that, of setting up the clever ending.
So the Shocker is able to defeat Spidey. Of course, Spidey is fighting with one arm tied to his chest. So, a B-list villain like this probably shouldn't be able to give him that much of a hard time. But he is, in this case. Harry Osborn, meanwhile, picks Pete up while driving through the city and tells him that his rich dad has bought Harry an apartment in the city so that he isn't having to commute all the way from wherever they are out, Westchester or something like that. It actually says commute from Westchester into presumably the Village, since I usually think Empire State University is basically New York University.
Wait just a second. Is Harry secretly a student at Professor Xavier's College for Gifted Youngsters? Isn't that in Westchester? I think some future writer may want to follow up on this.
Yes, no, he's a next door neighbor. It's like, what is with that plane that keeps on showing up here sometimes? It just seems to disappear. So anyway, Harry then is offering a roommate position to Pete, and Pete is thinking that sounds great, but I don't know how I'm going to break it to Aunt May if I'm going to do that. Pete has some pictures to sell to JJ, and he's playing hardball with him a little bit for money. And at one point, there's this line that J. Jonah Jameson says. He says to Pete, who's driving a hard bargain for the photos, he goes, "All right, you young Shylock, I'll have Betty Brant get you a check." And I'm like, okay, well, I have some problems with that line. It is being written by a first generation American Jew. So, I don't know if that's necessarily, some of the problems, if that were being written by some waspy writer, are a little bit blunted. But also, I think isn't a Shylock supposed to be a money lender, basically? Isn't that and that's what it's used as in New York mobster speak? So I don't know, it just jumped out at me just a little bit of a record scratch moment as we went by there. I'm like, what? Anyway, Foswell has been getting really suspicious of what it is between Pete and Spider-Man that he's able to get all these photos. So he decides to hail Pete out of the offices to try and find out what's going on. We'll come back to that in a minute. Meanwhile, the Shocker gets back to his lair, and we get his backstory. He was just a regular safecracker. He ended up getting sent to prison. He ended up tinkering in the prison workshop and ended up coming up with these vibro-shock things. And so then when he got out of prison, he was able to be the Shocker. Okay, sure. That's the nice compact little. Yeah. We just need a little something. Just give it to us. All right, let's go on from there. Aunt May has been in Florida on a vacation for a little bit, and she comes back to town. And this time, Matt, we were talking in the previous episode about where the train station was that he was when he ran into the lizard. And here they do specifically say this is the new Penn Station, the newly constructed Penn Station. So the unfortunate rat warren that they had built to replace the fabulous old train station. But
I don't think Ramita has gotten the memo here, because he's got they say that when the old Penn Station was there, you used to stride into New York like a giant. And then when they built the new Penn Station, you had to scurry like a cockroach. And this looks more like the giant Penn Station than the cockroach Penn Station.
It does. It does. Although now with the new Penn Station they've constructed, you once again stride in like a giant. It really is magnificent. Yes. All right. Both Pete and May seem to be bouncing around this subject, but then it turns out that May has been offered by Mrs. Watson to be her roommate. And she was not sure how to break that to Pete because she wants to do it, but didn't want to leave him alone. Pete was wondering how he was going to break it to her that he was going to be leaving to go stay with Harry. And so it all works out nice and peachy keen. We get a little bit more of the whole love triangle being built up here a little bit more, and more of a Flash about to be shipped off to Vietnam. But then we get to Boswell continuing to shadow Peter Parker. And I guess he's been shadowing him all day here, I guess it looks like. And so then he finally says, I think he's about to go meet Spider-Man. Well, he changes into Spider-Man, but Boswell wasn't able to see. And so
but Boswell can see that Peter Parker had his arm in a sling and Spider-Man has his arm in a sling. So right away, like at first when Spider-Man had his arm in a sling and was instantly seen as Spider-Man with his arm in a sling, and then was like, well, I'm just going to have to hide in my room as Peter Parker for the next, however, I guess months until I can take this sling off. And then he was like, no, that's crazy. I can't hide all that time. I just have to tell people I was in a motorcycle accident. He did this last issue, and then go around and just hope people don't put two and two together. But if you've got someone who is specifically following you to determine what your relationship to Spider-Man is, and you've got a sling, and then you change into Spider-Man and he's got a sling, then unsurprisingly, Frederick Boswell as Patch thinks Parker is Spider-Man. So how on earth are they going to get out of this? Well, I would think at this point they would just have to work out a deal. But instead, I will let you describe the absolutely crazy thing that happens instead.
Yes. So it looks like he's already turned into Spider-Man, but then he realizes that somebody has seen him because of his spider sense. And so he's got to, and then he's like, oh, it's Patch, who is the secret identity of Boswell. It's his whole anyway. And so who has just now figured out, Peter Parker is Spider-Man. And then Spider-Man does this whole like Charlie McCarthy like ventriloquist routine, going like having a whole conversation between Peter Parker and Spider-Man that he's just improvising. Says, hi, Spidey. No wonder I couldn't find you hiding up in the shadows like that. Parker, I told you to meet me here because I'm going after the Shocker tonight. Get your camera loaded and wait for my call. Got it? You can count on me, Spidey. And he specifies that he is changing his voice by muffling his voice under the mask. Although, as somebody pointed out on your Facebook group, Bill, on page 12, panel 2, he clearly does not have his mask anywhere near his face when he's still doing the whole back and forth here. Also, whenever he changes in one of the alleys that really doesn't exist in New York City anyway, he usually has Spider-Man's uniform on underneath his regular clothes. So if he wants to change into Spider-Man, he just takes off his civvies. He's Spider-Man. He wants to change back to Peter Parker, just takes off his mask and gloves and puts on his civvies, and he's Peter Parker. In this case, he creates a spider dummy to make it look like Spider-Man is swinging away after this whole ridiculous farce. And so what that means is he had to strip down to his jockstrap at one point here when he was changing, which he doesn't usually have to do. I'm guessing he wears a jockstrap just with all the blunt force trauma he receives all the time. And otherwise, it's like, I don't know whether you've ever seen like a professional cyclists like walking their cycle down after a long race and you can see a little too much. I think he's wearing a cup. So anyway, yes. And at that point, Boswell's just like, well, I guess I was wrong. Okay.
Yeah.
Stop. Anyway, Spider-Man then hears a policeman calling in a report about the Shocker again robbing. It looks like this is a bank. They have a big knockdown drag-out fight, very well drawn by Romita. Matt, as you said at the end, Spider-Man stops him by webbing up his little thumb triggers, and so he can't actually trigger the stuff. He's able to tie him up handily. And also he had decided that he really didn't need his arm taped up anymore. So he was doing this two-handed, so he was able to take care of him much better. Pete and May have a tearful goodbye to their co-living situation. And then Pete goes and moves in with Harry. But of course, as usual, he is always a little bit depressed. So even though he has now moved into his own place with his buddy, having his own late teenager bachelor New York lifestyle, he still finds reasons to be depressed.
So Bill, what did you think of this issue?
I thought overall it was really good. I thought there was obviously some kind of wacky things. I thought that Peter was way more snarky with Jameson than I had remembered him being in the past.
You're not wrong. He's getting snarkier.
Everything's like a sarcastic quip to JJJ. I maybe I'm wrong, but I don't remember him being, that snarky, as they say, to Jameson. And
he's being much more aggressive than usual.
Yeah, and he's insulting him pretty much, which I don't remember happening before. So I thought that was unusual. There was actually one word I had to look up when Harry's inviting Peter to be his roommate.
Yeah.
He says, this new Ingle Nook of mine has two bedrooms. So I was like, what the heck is an Ingle Nook? And I had to look it up. And it's something to do with a fireplace. It's like a little alcove along with a fireplace. So I thought that was interesting because I had never heard that word before in my life.
You and I did the exact same thing. I also saw that and was like, I'm going to have to look that up, and found basically that same thing. Yes.
Yeah. Like, what is an Ingle Nook?
One thing about Marvel Comics, you learn your vocabulary.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I did as a kid. Even if sometimes I pronounce them wrong, I still got the meaning of them.
Yeah, like horse duvers.
Yeah, I thought it was Chaos. I thought chaos was Chaos. It was Chaos. I'm like, chaos is spelled like it's spelled on Get Smart, Kaos. And like, that's not chaos, that's Chaos. So I was a little bit wrong on that one. One thing I thought about that was kind of goofy was the whole Shocker origin. I thought was, where he's just some guy, a regular guy with no extra training or anything intelligent about him. Usually, just goes to jail, and in their workshop, he invents this whole Shocker outfit and vibration. I forget what he calls them. Vibro
shocks, something or other.
Shocks. Yeah, he invents the entire thing. As a matter of fact, I remember reading, I forget what book it was in, but John Romita originally wanted to call him the Vibrator. And, I forget who vetoed that, but somebody vetoed that, luckily, because he originally wanted his name to be the Vibrator because that was his superpower. It was the Vibro Shock. So It would have been Spidey smashes the Vibrator.
Well, of course, many decades later, the term shocker took on its own somewhat obscene meaning. So don't worry, time caught up with it eventually, one way or the other.
But I just thought, he's just some guy that goes to prison. Then he just invents this incredible thing that can practically beat Spider-Man. So I thought that was a little goofy. But on the whole, I thought it was really good. I mean, really, the only other thing I took note of was, like you said, when he's depressed at the end, and he says, on that fateful day when I became Spider-Man, perhaps more than a physical change was wrought. Perhaps in some strange, mysterious way, when I gained another identity, I lost the capacity for happiness. It's like, oh wow, man, like you just got a new apartment, you're breaking away from your Aunt May, your arm is healed, but I guess Stan,
you just saved the city of New York.
You saved the city of New York. You just got paid by JJJ for pictures, but I guess Stan wanted to have that little ending there of him being depressed.
Well, I mean, he's just a depressive person. And, the character he often reminds me of the most is Charlie Brown. He's very similar to Charlie Brown in many ways. And, Charlie Brown can never, Charlie Brown's got a pretty good life, too, and can never figure out why he's so depressed all the time.
Right.
And I mean, that's what the Peanuts Holiday Special is about. And I mean, it's an interesting take. I mean, obviously, Peanuts was a highly successful comic. This is a highly successful comic. People like reading about this, but you wouldn't think it would work. People do
about him going out with, like, having to choose between Gwen and Mary Jane. Like, if he's a loser, why does he ride a motorcycle and have these two beautiful women hanging around him all the time? It was like they were upset that he wasn't going to be a loser anymore. So I think that was definitely part of his popular persona, the superhero with problems.
Yeah.
I guess Stan wanted to remind us of that by the end of this comic. And I also thought when Patch thought that Spider-Man and Peter Parker were the same person. Why didn't Peter just invent this brother that no one had ever heard of, like Paul Parker or something? That would seem to be an easy way out. I don't know.
Yeah.
Or it could have been you guys never heard of. He's Spider-Man, not me.
Or it's his buddy Peter Palmer.
Yeah.
Right. So
he should run back around the corner and explain to his twin brother. And then put on silly sunglasses.
Just a couple other little things that I noticed here. At one point, when Spider-Man first encounters the Shocker, he says, "Spider-Man." Spider-Man responds, "Well, I'm not Hubert Humphrey." So clearly, the year of Soupy sales is truly dead.
Looking at my notes, I like the look of the Shocker. I like that he has like a reason to wear what he's wearing, and he's wearing, this padded suit in order to protect himself from his own vibro shock. So I really like the look of him. I do think it's funny that everybody thinks it's great that Flash Thompson is going off to Vietnam. They're all fighting age. They all could be voluntarily going to Vietnam. Presumably there's some reason why they're not all volunteering for Vietnam. And because presumably going to Vietnam is a bad thing in some ways, but nobody's going like, "Oh, holy hell, Flash, I'm so sorry you have to go to Vietnam." In terms of like, A, you could get killed. B, you could have psychological damage from the war, which I guess people weren't really grappling with yet at the time. And no, none of this has anything to do with the amount of damage he might do to the people of Vietnam who don't deserve any of this. But that's of course going to be the last thing to consider. But you would think people might be like, "Flash, I hope you don't die."
Yeah, I think it might have been a little bit different if Ditko had still been there.
I don't know. I think it would have been. Definitely. I am fascinated to know how Ditko would have handled it. But as sort of a libertarian Republican, would he be in favor of conscription or not? I don't know.
I know he had Peter Parker like going by protesters and like referring to them sarcastically and kind of snarkily. And I heard that Stanley went to Ditko and said, like, "Don't do that. That's part of our audience now as college people. Don't be insulting them." And I don't think Ditko took it very well.
No, that was his last issue.
Yeah. Yeah. He didn't take it very well at all.
All
right. Let's try to quickly move through the rest of these books. Let's go ahead and do Here Comes Daredevil, the Man Without Fear, number 26. We have two of Daredevil's most wonderful villains. Well, really, we have three of them, because on the cover, we have the Masked Marauder and Stealth Man, both pretty lame villains. And when you get inside, you find out we still have Leapfrog as well, a third lame villain. So this is not good news. But it says, "At last see the Masked Marauder unmasked." It's one of our least inspired titles, but the stories of last, Stealth Man strikes again. And it's not a terrible cover by Colin, showing what it would be like facing someone who is so high up above the city streets and being in danger of falling. I don't think it's quite as good as Wally Wood did when he introduced the Stealth Man, but it's still pretty good. Let's go ahead and jump inside. We see pulse-pounding presentation by Smilin' Stan Lee and genial Gene Colan. Lots of little lettering by Artie Simek, which means Gene Colan is inking himself. Is this the first time we've seen Gene Colan ink himself?
No, he doesn't. I assumed that, but I did not assume that, because I've never seen him ink himself ever. I looked this up online, and what was the name? I think it was Gioia, if I remember right, who had actually inked it. That just wasn't credited.
They just forgot to credit Gioia, I guess.
Yeah.
It looks like Gioia inks. So then we go ahead. Daredevil is getting across town. I never buy it when he gets across town. He is swinging and jumping. I saw that you liked on Facebook the way he is jumping over one of the New York Public Library lions. I don't think I like it quite as much as you do, but I still think it's a pretty good panel. So then he arrives at his office and is instantly like, "Oh, I'm at my office. That means I get to change into not Matt Murdock, but Mike Murdock, Matt Murdock's crazy swinging twin brother." And he is talking about how he's become addicted to being Mike Murdock, who is allowed to hit on Karen and who is allowed to go a little crazy. Now all I got to do is a change in my personality. I figure a clown like Mike Murdock is sure to be on all the time. It's funny, I even feel like a different guy when I become Mike Murdock. And so then he talks about how he likes it. And then he is, sure enough, wearing an extremely silly bow tie, wearing extremely silly glasses. Karen perks right up when Mike comes in the office. She has a very flirtatious smile. And Foggy is very unhappy about this and felt like he had a hard enough time competing with Matt. Now he can't compete with Mike. Nobody ever says to Mike, what's it like being Daredevil? Like, everybody just really
spies right away that he's Daredevil, but nobody considers this to be something that is a proper topic of conversation.
What do you do other than being Daredevil? How come we've never heard of you before? How did you feel when your father was murdered? How?
Yeah.
Just a bizarre storyline, one of the most bizarre storylines in Marvel Comics. Even more bizarre, they decide, so Murdoch and Nelson are defending the leapfrog in court, and Matt decides to attend, not as Matt, but as Mike, which means they have to explain. They're like, wait, why isn't Matt going to be here? This is one of our biggest cases. And he's like, well, Matt can't be here because you may have noticed we never see Matt and Mike in the same room at the same time, and Mike is going to be there. Why he is attending as Mike makes no sense. Like, Stan has just fallen in love with Mike and wants to have Mike be literally on all the time. And so then, meanwhile, they're saying to the leapfrog, like, aren't these your leapfrog shoes? And he's like, no, they aren't. And they're like, are you sure? And he's like, okay, fine, they are. And I'm going to put them on and I'm going to leap out the window, which he does. But he doesn't realize they're on the second floor and he crashes seemingly to his death. Not quite to his death, but he ends up a crumpled lump on the sidewalk. Stiltman then shows up and says, I was coming to free you from court so that we could team up and be supervillains together because we both are tremendously lame and we both have no good way of getting around. You have to hop on springs. I have to walk on stilts that still have no knees. So I have to stiff-leggedly walk around town with stilts that have no knees. And therefore, we would make a great combo. And Daredevil flies down, sees Stiltman sort of awkwardly trying to drag off the leapfrog with his shattered legs, presumably. And
I think Colin was thinking a little too much about how the Stiltman would have to be positioning himself in order for that to work. That's one of those cases where it's like, no, don't try to make it work like it would work in real life. That just makes it worse. Please. Anyway. Go on.
And so then Daredevil fights Stiltman for several pages. They have a brief flashback of how Stiltman survived getting shrunk down to nothingness when we last saw him. We just, in case this comic could not get any dumber, it gets much dumber because we have the Mass Marauder again using his absolutely crazy, huge suction tube to suction himself into and out of tall buildings, presumably open windows in tall buildings, suction himself into and out of tall buildings, and just when you think that sounds dumb, you then find out that this is a building he himself owns, that he is suctioning himself into one of the tall windows because he, turns out, is Matt and Foggy's landlord who has been hassling them for the rent. Well, it turns out he's not just been hassling them for the rent, he's also been on a crime spree across the city. And he then uses his suction truck to suction his way into their offices, even though he is their landlord and has a key and could have just walked in at any time. This is tremendously dumb. What on earth? And then just as the Stiltman showed up to drag Leapfrog away by reaching under his armpits and dragging him away so that they could team up, then the exact same thing happens at the end of the issue as Frank Farnham, the landlord, shows up to drag Stiltman away. And it's like, I want us to team up. I'm going to drag you away by putting my hands underneath your armpits. And this is a meeting of the bozos that continues. Meanwhile, Karen is still very much crushing on both Daredevil and Mike Murdoch, who she thinks are one and the same person. And Funky thinks it was bad enough she had a crush on Matt, but now I've had it. So that is the end of the issue. Next issue, Mike Murdoch must die, if only. This is a tremendously dumb issue. Bill, what did you think of this issue?
Oh, God. This was definitely the most bizarre out of the line. Maybe it's Colin plotting. I would almost kind of hope. I would hope this wouldn't be Stan. It's just so bizarrely put together. The way that Daredevil kicks Stiltman into a building, and the very next page they just start with, "Oh, we might have forgot to tell you how Stiltman escaped from being shrunk, so we'll just tell you that right now." It's not a flashback of a character, and then they go back to the fight between Stiltman and Daredevil. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, they switch to the Mass Marauder breaking into a building that he owns, like you say. It's just so bizarrely plotted. And even I know Stan probably, almost certainly dialogued it, but there's one point when he knocks Stiltman down into the alley. Daredevil says, "Stay back, average typical crowd of passerby."
I love
Like,
that
what?
line, actually. It's so ridiculous. I was saying
Daredevil talk like that. I mean,
well, it sounds like the Tick.
yeah. Stay back, average typical crowd would pass her by. Like, what? You know, I just, and the whole issue is just filled with like the hip Mike Murdoch talk that he does. And at one point he's doing a James Cagney impersonation, but Karen has to say that obviously because you can't hear what he's doing. Karen's like, oh, don't you dig his James Cagney impersonation? And Foggy's just like, this guy's a jerk, you know. And he's probably wondering why Matt never introduced them ever because he thought they were good friends.
Yeah.
You know, Foggy hates him, but Karen's like, oh, hey, you know.
Right. It's like,
it's like
because
so
because
bizarre.
every lady loves bad boys. So this guy's a jerk. I guess I'm going to go for him.
He always wears glasses. No one ever questions that.
Yeah.
No one ever questions where he came from. It's just so bizarrely plotted. The fact that Mike would go to the courtroom instead of Matt actually representing the person that's paying him to represent him. Even though Foggy says 4 or 5 times, I do corporate law, but they still let him take the case anyway.
They make him take the case. I don't think he wants to. Matt's
No,
just like, nah, I'm going to be out of here.
Not there.
Yeah.
Matt decides to show up as Mike for some stupid reason. So Foggy has to take the case, but he doesn't even get to because they give the criminal back the tools that he used to commit crime. And so he jumps out the window immediately. You know, when Leapfrog jumps out of the building and breaks his legs, Stiltman just happens to come there and say, oh, we make a good team. Like, what? Why? You know, why would you even think that? It's just so bizarre to me. You know, I didn't really read the Daredevils of this era very much. But I've heard about the Matt Murdock saga for quite a while, you know, being in the group that I'm in.
Yes.
But I never really experienced it that much. I never really, I mean, like I have all these comics, but I haven't really gone through month by month like I should. I have, but I never got up to 1967. And this is just totally bizarre to me. I mean, I would think it's got to be Gene Cole and
who knows? It's all ridiculous. A couple of things to mention here. On page 12, at one point, Daredevil is thinking to himself, man, it sure was lucky I was here. If Stiltman ever managed to get the Leapfrog safely away, what a team those two would make. And I'm like, what kind of team would they make? Please explain to me, because I'm not getting it.
How are their powers complementary at all?
Yeah, I mean, and they're both lame, so it's just like, oh, good,
Yeah,
put the two of them together so that we can just knock them out real quick. But yeah, it's some of the Daredevil action stuff just really doesn't seem to work. Like I said, with the exception of panel 1 on page 2, that I really love that one there. But most of the rest of the stuff here, it's just like, how is he swinging there? How does that work? Where is he coming from? And at the end, when they reveal that Frank Farnham is the mass marauder, there's a footnote that says, we really don't expect you to be too surprised, faithful one, since he's about the only suspect we've handed you all these months. We just wanted to see if you were paying attention. And I'm like, I didn't give it a single thought. Like, I didn't know because I didn't care.
Yeah.
Like, I knew there was something up with the landlord, but how am I supposed to put that together with Masked Marauder? You know, it's just.
They open it. It's called Stiltman Strikes Again. The opening is, honest, we promise you our spellbinding saga is far more inspiring than the somewhat pedestrian title which it bears. Like, what? You made up the title, but, you know, but that's all I wanted to say.
Yeah, I think that was Stan Lee managing expectations, curbing people's enthusiasm right from the beginning.
Yes, he apologizes for the title on the cover as well in a different way. He's really experiencing some self-loathing about the title that he himself presumably wrote. But yes. I hope he has his self-esteem improves. But yes, this is, I say at the end of my notes, ridiculous issue. Can't tell if it's in on the joke. Is this just a joke book? What even is this book? Question mark, question mark. Then good colon self-inked art. But I guess he didn't actually ink himself. I can't tell if this book is intentionally, because Leapfrog, I talked about last issue, how Leapfrog will eventually become like a joke villain used in joke issues.
Right.
That's sort of already the case here. He's sort of, jumping out the window and forgetting he's on the second floor. He's sort of already become a joke character. But is the Still End supposed to be a joke character? Is Mass Marauder supposed to be a joke character? I can't even tell.
I don't think he forgot he was on the second floor. Well, for whatever reason, one of his bounce shoes falls off as he's jumping out. So, not that really matters at all to anything that we're talking about here. All right, so let's move on to The Mighty Thor, number 138. There is no text on the cover other than the title of the book. You see a ghostly image of Thor watching in dismay as Don Blake with his walking stick is being pulled down through the New York City street by trolls underneath. And it is really quite a good panel. As a matter of fact, this is quite a good issue. So yes. The Mighty Thor, from Asgard to Earth, the flames of battle. To catch us up, verily it hath been written, the beautiful goddess Sif has been abducted by Ulik, deadliest and most powerful of all trolls. In the effort to capture the hammer of Thor, he has taken her to Earth as bait for a trap in which to catch the god of thunder. Garnished with grandeur by Stan the Man Lee and Jack King Kirby, inked by Vince the Prince Coletta, lettered by Artie the Smarty Simak. And I do have to say that Vince he has been doing a better than usual job in the last several issues. You're always going to be able to find a panel or two where it's just like, no, that's the Vince Coletta we don't like. But he has been doing a pretty good job, and he does a pretty good job through most of this issue. Not the opening splash page, but through most of the issue.
On the splash page, the only place where you can definitely tell it's Coletta, as always, is the elbows. He always puts in way too many hash marks on the elbows. Yeah. Thor is luring himself down to presumably what is supposed to be Manhattan. I can't tell where this is on the coastline of Manhattan. I'm not exactly familiar with this bit of coastline that he is luring himself towards.
Yeah, it looks like it might be somewhere more around Brooklyn or Queens.
You could probably tell from Jack's original pencils before Vince got it.
It's possible.
Yeah.
So anyway, so Thor has returned to Earth to try to find Sif. He wants to blend in with the locals to be looking for her more discreetly. Turns himself into Don Blake. Turns out that the trolls are monitoring him and sees him turn into Don Blake. They keep on talking about how they've got something called Oracle, Orikal, that is helping them with their invasion of Asgard and their kidnapping of Sif and their kidnapping of Thor and all this sort of stuff. So they just keep on saying, our warriors cannot lose, for they're aided by Oracle himself. And that's apparently how they knew to look and see him turn into Don Blake and all this sort of stuff. So we have the moment from the cover where the trolls show up underneath the streets of New York. I don't think they're actually literally underneath the streets of New York. This seems to be a mystical sort of barrier kind of thing where he's being dragged down into the land of the trolls, but I'm not entirely sure. One way or the other, he is dragged down. The trolls try to turn the walking stick back into Mjolnir, but of course it doesn't work because they're not Thor. They're not worthy. And so Don Blake is able to basically sort of touch the stick as it's being tapped the next time, which then turns him into Thor and makes Mjolnir fly back into his hand. We then just have some fantastic battle scenes as the trolls are invading Asgard. Some Asgardian is being sent to go get help for the invasion, and he is caught by a bunch of trolls in just a spectacular panel. Top of page 7, you see the horse is clearly mid-gallop and has just been grabbed. Basically, all of its legs have been grabbed individually by different trolls. And so this doesn't look like a picture of a horse that is actually galloping. It does not look like Jack Kirby had an actual photo of a horse mid-gallop and just drew that. It looks like he is drawing basically that but the horse is currently struggling against these things. And meanwhile, there are other trolls that are grabbing the rider in, what really looks like kind of a horrific kind of moment of being ripped off your horse by these trolls. And, it's like, depending on what kind of movie you were watching, if this were a movie, I would almost expect that person to just like end up being devoured by trolls like piranhas or something like that. It really looks horrifying. So the trolls are trying to keep reinforcements from getting to Asgard. Page 8, we see Oracle, and it apparently is some creature from another universe that has, some kind of the infinite eye. You possess the infinite eye. And so the trolls have trapped this being in a sea of fire, which is apparently the only thing that can subdue it. And they are promising to let Oracle go back to its own universe if it helps them with their invasion of Asgard. So fantastic splash page image there. Thor is at this point battling Ulik, and we have, just how can you go wrong with Thor and Ulik battling under the pencil of Jack Kirby? You cannot. So Thor makes it to where they have Sif encased in this kind of glass bullet looking thing. He sets his hammer down for a moment while he is trying to do something with the cocoon that she's in, at which point one of the trolls has something called the Orb of Oracle, which then is able to suck the hammer into it and transport it away. So nobody's carrying it. It's just been sucked into this other portal. The trolls all escape, and they're like, okay, now that we have Thor's hammer, that means that and Thor can't be helping all of that stuff. We will now be able to be successful in our invasion of Asgard. Odin is about to go into battle himself. All of his people are like, dude, you're the king. You can't. And he's just like, dude, if Asgard's going to fall, I got to be here. I got to be doing my part. And then we see the actual troll attack with these really fantastic vehicles. Then once again, page 15, just spectacular splash page with all of these trolls. At the end, it's just we're left with this cliffhanger of Asgard is teetering on the brink of being conquered by the trolls. Thor is trapped on Earth without his hammer and is there with Sif. And he's just saying, if I fail, then Asgard and then Earth will fall. So, and it's the next issue, To Die Like a God. Just a spectacular action story here. You cannot get much better when it comes to Asgardian troll war action than what we have here.
Yeah. Bill, what do you think of the issue?
It was fantastic. There's such a difference between this and the Daredevil issue. I mean, even the Spider-Man issue, 'cause I don't know, if Romita was up to speed yet, but this is with Kirby, I assume during the plotting, this is just so good. This is my other notes on some of the other issues were like, this is goofy and this is goofy and why did they do that? My notes on this issue were just like, wow, what a splash page. Wow, what an action sequence. Wow, what another splash page. And it's like action happening on every page, something different happening, plot advancing on every page. Everything's logical, just moves so well. And it's just so well plotted, so well drawn. It's just like head and shoulders above some of the other issues this month, except for the other ones drawn by Kirby. It's just so good, And
Yes.
One thing I noticed was that for this month, everything that had Stan's name on it, none of them say written by Stan and drawn by this person. They all say some version of a production by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, or this issue by Stan Lee and G. Colan. None of them say penciler and writer. The only ones that do this month that I saw were written by Roy Thomas. So I thought that was kind of interesting as well.
I think the one exception this month is Submariner for some reason. Submariner is a story by Smile and Stanley, art by Wild Bill River. I don't know if that had something to do with Stan and Bill's relationship, but you're right. All of the other books, except for Submariner, pointedly do not give Stan explicit writing credit and the artist explicit art credit, but instead credit them on the same line, which he started. Of course, he started giving Ditko potting credit, but then shortly after Ditko left him, he started crediting himself and Kirby on the same line, which seemed to be a way to sort of de facto give him potting credit. Then he, after a couple of months of that, he started doing that with all of his artists, except for Bill Everett, which is fascinating. I don't know what all is going on here, but yes, I give Stan a lot of credit for not giving himself a lot of credit for this issue of Thor.
Yeah, it's just an amazing issue. It's so good, you know?
I forget why this whole fight moved to Earth, and it's not at all clear from this issue why they were like, wait, let's stop fighting in Asgard, let's fight on Earth, other than they sort of feel like, you know, even though Jane is gone, they have to have some sort of reason to keep this book set on Earth when it doesn't make any sense anymore. I thought it was fun how he tricked them into tapping his cane for him. That was fun little Don Blake cleverness. They finally name Ulick's brass knuckle devices, which are called Fantastic Fist Pounders. So it's good to know that. I'm always a fan. I talk about in my books about how internecine conflict is always better than conflict between groups. Or it's not necessarily better than, but good writing focuses just as much on internecine conflict as it does on conflict between groups. And I love all the internecine conflict in this issue, where we get Ulick's boss, Girador, constantly plotting against his own trolls, and his own trolls are plotting against him, and they're fighting over control of Oracle. And Oracle just wants out of here. Oracle seems somewhat similar to the Submariner character, and then he seems to have fallen out of a spaceship somewhere or something, and somehow ended up involved in a world he never made, as Marvel would say. Yeah, I like how at the end Thor is worried that his new girlfriend will see him as Don Blake for the first time, and he's like, I think we've all been in that situation where you're like, uh-oh, you know, I've been dating this girl for a while now, and she's about to find out who I really am. She's about to see me, you know, with just my socks on. And that's going to be awkward. This is a very awkward time for this to happen to poor Thor.
Yeah, I remember there was I think it was a Dragon Con back in the late 80s that I guess would have been like 89. I was dating this girl, and then, you know, I was like, oh, no, I'm busy. I'm going to be going to this thing this weekend. She's like, oh, I'll come with you. And then it was just like, oh, dear God, no, she's going to see. She's gonna see comics convention me. I still kind of cringe a little bit at that to some extent. Anyway, so yes, Tales of Asgard. So in the previous issue, we started a new story in Tales of Asgard. A countryman of Hogun had been essentially beaten and left for dead, and they found him as he was having his last breaths, and Hogun is going to try to avenge him. Matt and I, Bill, were talking in the previous episodes about how this seems to be probably where they got the idea to cast Hogun with an Asian American actor in the movie. In that they had all this stuff that sort of seemed vaguely pan-Asian about the situation. Right. Well, here we follow up with that a little bit more with this little caption. Quest for the Mystic Mountain. It says, mighty Thor and his gallant companions searching for the evil Mogul. So we already talked about how Mogul Empire, Mongols. Actually, the Mogul Empire were originally Mongols. That's where the name came from in the first place. Who is the sworn enemy of Hogun the Grim, now find themselves in the land of Hindi, H-I-N-D-I, which is the name of the language that also shares the same, is also cognate with the word Hindu, as they stray far from Asgard, seeking the magic mountain of Mogul. So just a little bit more of that whole idea that backs up the idea of casting him as such in the Marvel movies. So they have seeked out this wise ascetic monk to try to get the wisdom to find where to go next in their quest to avenge this countryman of Hogun's. And this wise man is guarded by this kind of big, hairy Cyclops looking thing. And so basically they are all battling the Cyclops until the wise man finally comes out and says, who dares disturb the meditations of Wazir? He then says, oh, well, you know, only the mightiest of the mighty could have felled the invincible ogre, who's the name of this Cyclops thing. He asks them why they've done this, why they've come. He then says, okay, well, grab onto this walking stick of mine and it will give you the knowledge you seek. Then they find themselves in just a swirl of mists. The wise man seems to disappear. The stick seems to disappear, but they now have within them the knowledge they need to go on to the next step. And so then they go and find Volstagg, who was not with them this whole time because he was taking a nap. And by taking a nap, we mean he was on guard duty. So then at the end, Thor says, Volstagg, can it be thou art slumbering? And he's while basically mostly asleep. Fie upon it. 'Twas just a pose, better to lure an Oh, and in the previous panel, Fandral had said, watch him claim he was just posing in order to lure people in. And indeed, that's exactly what he says before falling back asleep. So next, Thor finds the Mystic Mountain. Again, these Tales of Asgard stories tend to be relatively simple, but lovely. This is no exception.
Yeah. Falstaff is sort of like the Cowardly Lion in that sometimes he comes through in the clutch, and in some cases, he is genuinely incompetent. So this is a case where, if anybody had tried to sneak up on them, him being asleep when he is supposed to be on watch duty would have been a genuine problem, but sometimes he does come through in the clutch. Yeah, I thought this was a great Tales of Asgard story. It is fascinating to see them deal with incorporating two Asgardian myths. It's a fun battle against Wazir, the giant of the Mystic Mountain. I love this story. I love that we're getting deeper and deeper into another great epic. The last, I believe, Tales of Asgard epic before they finally do away with this backup feature.
Bill, you have any thoughts to say about this before we move on to Tales to Astonish?
Well, I didn't have this one, but the whole general Tales of Asgard, I just always got the feeling that Kirby really loved doing these. This was
Yes.
like his wheelhouse. So, I guess the gods and the old tales of old gods. And, this really seemed to be a strip that he was really into. I think that even Vince Colletta did nice work on the Tales of Asgard feature.
And he did good work on this whole issue. I got to say, there were some spectacular splash pages that Colletta could very easily have just scribbled out and really kind of ruined the cohesiveness of the design that was going on. And he did not. He really acquitted himself quite nicely throughout most of this issue.
In the 12 years of doing the Marvel group, the one thing I hear extremely often is if people don't like Vince Colletta's inking, they'll almost always say, except on Thor.
There is certainly a faction there who's like, well, yeah, he's terrible, but he did Thor the whole time, and I love Thor, and I've really only seen Kirby, for the most part, only ever saw Kirby doing Thor under Coletta's inks. So therefore that's what I'm expecting to see. There are certainly, I've heard people make that argument.
Right.
Yeah, I'm not one of those people. I think that he did most of his work on Thor was pretty terrible, but I think that now that he's been on the book for 3 or 4 years, he's starting to get much better. But I think he absolutely butchered the book for at least his first 2 years on the book. But I am greatly looking forward to when Bill Everett takes over the inking of Thor in another year and a half or so.
Yeah. Okay, so Matt, I believe you were taking Tales to Astonish.
Let's go and move to Tales to Astonish number 89, Submariner and the Incredible Hulk. Then There Shall Come a Stranger. We have a gorgeous Gil Kane penciled and inked cover with the Stranger now wearing a much more science fiction-y outfit than we last saw him in, shooting beams at the Hulk. But before we discuss the Hulk story, let's discuss the Namor story. The Prince and the Power. Story by Smile and Stan Lee, art by Bill Everett, lettering by adorable Art Simek, all of whom proudly proclaim Imperious Rex. So we were saying before that this is for some reason the only book where Stan Lee takes a writing credit and gives the artist just an art credit in this issue without giving Bill Everett any plotting credit. It could be that Bill Everett was pointedly refusing to plot. I don't know what was going on.
I guess it could also be that, there might have been some, with the whole thing with Carl Burgos recently with the original Human Torch, it could be that maybe they were afraid that since he created the thing in the first place, that if they were, putting him down here as in like a co-creator of the current material, that could be a legal thing. Who knows? I mean, once again, just complete speculation on my part.
Yeah, that's really interesting speculation that they didn't want him to be able to claim any creator credit on the character or sue for ownership of the character. So we have talked before about how Bill Everett, I don't know if he should get any plotting credit, but certainly an art credit, is the most sort of goofy golden age type artist and maybe writer artist they have at Marvel. And this is a very silly golden age type story where there is this gigantic robot that looks very much like a sort of golden age robot that Atuma has captured and reprogrammed and is having attack Atlantis. We were talking about how it looked weird that Atlantis might have aqueducts, which it would not need, but we now see it's sort of like a footbridge that the robot is taking to get to Atlantis. And I will just get through this very quickly. The robot attacks Atlantis for several pages. Namor has gone back and forth over the years as to whether or not he can talk to fish like Aquaman can. this issue, he is very much talking to fish and commanding them. He goes ahead and has a bunch of sharks attack the robot. Then he has a whale attack the robot, which is a really fun sequence. Then he has a bunch of squids attack the robot, which is also a fun sequence. And I guess not squids, octopi. He refers to them as octopi. So in the great debate as to whether or not the plural of octopuses or octopi, we know where Namor comes down.
Or
and
octopodes.
He should know.
Or octopodes. That's the other. Yes.
But we know where he comes down. But then he has Dorma. He says, Dorma, I want you to grab a movie camera and shoot the movie camera at the robot. And she's like, okay, this is the weirdest thing you've ever asked me to do, but I'll go ahead and do it. And then it turns out this movie camera also projected an image way up into outside the atmosphere of the Earth. And Namor said, whoever dropped this robot on Earth must want it back. So if they just see, they see that we project this image up into outer space, they are going to realize, oh, there it is. Let's go back and pick up our robot. So they do. The alien ship comes back, sucks the robot up in a big tube, and takes off with it again. Atuma realizes, even though Atuma felt just fine in his chances of defeating Atlantis before he got the robot, now that he's had the robot and lost it, he realizes he has no chance. So he swims away, and that seems to be the end of this 2-issue storyline. This is a bizarre 2-issue storyline. It is silly looking, very Golden Age looking. It is not going to be consistent that Namor can talk to fish or command them to attack people. But I think Everett has a lot of fun. I thought Everett's run on Doctor Strange, which recently ended, was underrated because he just has a lot of visual imagination that he uses. And he is using a lot of his visual imagination here. The sequence of the robot fighting the sharks and then the whale and then the octopi is really a lot of fun and justifies this book's existence. Bill, what did you think of this book?
I largely agree with what you said. Goofy plotline, very nice art. I always love Bill Everett. But again, this is a book where you contrast it with the Thor book that was just before, and it's just like a world of difference in plotting.
Oh, yeah.
The ending where he uses the projecto camera to shoot a picture of the robot up into the air, hoping that the people who are looking for the robot will be just passing by at that precise moment, in time, that they weren't looking for the robot an hour earlier or an hour later, that they would be, the whole plan hinges on them just happening to be driving by in their spaceship at that exact moment.
I think the idea is that they know they dropped something, they desperately need it back, and they are just desperately retracing their steps. They're like, I know it's got to be here somewhere. I think I dropped it right around here.
There's a giant picture of it. Oh yeah, it was there. All right, let's suck him up. Use the sucker ray. We'll sucker him back up into the ship. Yeah, I mean, yeah. It's just goofy. It's like you say, it's Golden Age goofy. It kind of shows you the difference between Golden Age plotting and Silver Age plotting in just a couple of pages. It's goofy, but like you said, much fun. It's goofy fun because it's Everett. I don't know if someone else had been drawing it, it would be as much fun. But Bill Everett's always good. It's inoffensive fun.
Yes. Let's go ahead and go on to the back half of the book with the Hulk. Then There Shall Come a Stranger, handled with Hulkitude by Stan the Manly and Gil Sugarcane, lettered by Sam Rosen. So we have Gil Kane inking himself. I always love Gil Kane inking himself. Very strange. Doesn't look like a Marvel comic. Looks like magazine illustration. Extreme use of shadow and sharp lines. Thankfully, we finally seemingly dealt with Boomerang once and forever last issue. So we pick up this issue. We got nothing going on in this book. Bruce Banner is sleeping on a rocky ledge. There is no ongoing plot. No one is trying to kill him. He's not trying to kill anybody. What is going to happen next in this book? Well, who boy, what happens is the Stranger shows up. I think the last time we saw the Stranger, he was still dressed as an earthly dude wearing a white lab coat. He shows up wearing young clothes. I kind of liked him better when he was just dressed as a human in a lab coat, but I liked this alien costume more than what will become his normal alien costume, which shows more skin and is red and green, which is never my favorite colors for a thing. This one is blue and green and white, and I like it. So then the Stranger shows up and he sucks up Bruce Banner. Now he does something interesting for this issue. He doesn't let Banner speak. He silences Banner. And then he goes in and says, but I'm sure here's what you would say if you could speak. And so the stranger has this massive conversation with himself in which he sort of is saying like, here's what I say. And here's what you would then say, Banner. And here's what I say. And it's like, why not just have Banner speak and actually say these things? It's a somewhat bizarrely written issue. The stranger explains that he basically has decided to destroy the Earth, decimate the population down to about 10% of what it is now, even though I realize that is not what decimate originally meant. It originally meant to destroy 1/10, and then it later came to mean to destroy 9/10. But he wants to decimate in the modern idea of the word, the Earth population, start over again and make it much better. And he, of all the weapons you could use to destroy most of the life on Earth, I don't think that the Hulk is the best weapon. I think that, given that, as we said before, Marvel would later establish the Hulk had been killing people all this time. But at the time, the idea was the Hulk had never killed anybody. And it's always good to have Hulk versus the human race. That's always an interesting storyline. And this is an interesting way to do it. And I absolutely love the art in this issue. I love the penciling and inking. We also get a quick scene with Rick Jones and Thunderbolt Ross and Glenn Talbot and Betty Ross, which is rehash of every scene they've ever had together. Once again, Rick Jones sneaks onto an army base. Once again, he says, no, the Hulk, we've got to help the Hulk. And Thunderbolt Ross is skeptical.
And Betty says when she sees him, it's Rick Jones, Bruce Banner's teenage friend, which just like, do you have to say it like that? That sounds really suspect.
But so it ends with the stranger sending the Hulk off to destroy mankind. I think this is a beautifully penciled issue and really nicely plotted issue too. Given that this book has to essentially start over from scratch and has no ongoing storylines at this point, I think this is a good way to start the book over from scratch and have a huge new menace show up. And the stranger had been a good character in X-Men, and it's good to bring him back. And I'm liking this book. Bill, what do you think of this book?
I liked it as well. Bill Cairns inking himself, as you said, is always nice. Like in some respects, it does almost seem like a DC comic when he inks himself. But it's really nice here. It gets everything done in just a couple of pages. I agree that I don't think that the Hulk is the best weapon to destroy mankind with. He maybe could seal a couple of atomic bombs or something like that. That probably would be a little bit quicker than the Hulk. But yeah, it's really good. But, plotted well, drawn well, gets everything done quickly and cleanly. Just a nice little story.
Yep. Steve, what do you think?
I think that you've said it well enough. I am willing to leave it at that.
Okay. Anyway, yeah. So that's good for that book. Let's go ahead and move on to our final book of the first half of the month.
Yes, our final book of this episode, The X-Men number 30, The Warlock Wakes. Matt, I know that you and I have had a little bit of a dispute about whether or not my description of Werner Roth as being aggressively adequate is being fair or not. I am wondering whether you were missing Werner Roth on this particular issue at this point.
Here is my answer. I do not. I think this month is the tale. I do not. I like this issue better than Werner Roth. I think this month is the tale of two Jack Sparlings. We have a new Marvel penciler named Jack Sparling who comes on and does 2 books this month, one of which we'll cover in this episode and one we'll cover in the next episode. He shows up and he does both X-Men and Captain America this month. And the X-Men is inked by John Tartaglione, who is an inker I don't like very much. Captain America is inked by Joe Sinnott, who is a wonderful inker. But I don't like at all the Captain America story with Jack Sparling inked by Joe Sinnott. But I really like this X-Men issue with Jack Sparling inked by John Tartaglione. I think that it sort of feels like Neil Adams to me. The art has a lot of dynamism. I think it's much better than Werner Roth. I really like on page 2, I will let you go ahead and describe the issue, but I really like Jean being yanked up into the air by her feet, essentially, on page 2. She really feels like she's being flung around upside down. And I really liked a lot of the stuff. I really like the Warlock's face on page 3. I really like the flying horses on page 4, even though I have no idea why they switched from flying horses to one-man hovercraft. I like the one-man hovercraft on page 6. You had hoped that this issue would make me repent of my criticism of Werner Roth. It does not. I like this issue.
Fair enough. And I'm not saying that Werner Roth can't take some criticism. I'm just saying that, I found this, I did not like this as much as I've been liking the other X-Men issues lately. And part of it is, I want to say that Jack Sparling seems like a decent artist, but he just doesn't seem like a good fit for Marvel. Is what it seems like to me. I'm actually getting some kinds of echoes of when Joe Orlando was drawing Daredevil, where it just felt like, yeah, this just is not a good fit. Like, you're clearly a good artist, but this is just not where you're doing your thing. But, to each their own, fair enough. So out of nowhere, right after the X-Men's last adventure, suddenly Jean Grey and actually all the X-Men start getting sucked up into the void, and Jean Grey is being pulled away faster than the others, and they basically kind of lose her. Professor X somehow gets drawn up as well, but not the rest of the X-Men. And this character called the Warlock has come to grab her to make her his new Empress of the World. It just seems like a super non sequitur for this thing to begin. This Warlock, it turns out, is the same character that was in Thor during that brief period where Sinnott was both penciling and inking the book, where we had Merlin. And it turned out that Merlin, the original Merlin from the Arthurian legends, had been a mutant. And he had these various illusion powers as well as other sorts of generalized mutant powers. For whatever reason, he is not calling himself Merlin anymore. He is now calling himself instead the Warlock. Okay, sure, why not? I'm fine with that. One of the things I noticed art-wise is the way, and this is as much of a Tartaglione thing as it is a Sparling thing, Jean Grey's mask throughout this thing looks like it's black on one half and blue on the other half, which really kind of bugs me. It was just really jumping out at me the whole time. The Warlock has this whole underground cave thing where he's got some modern henchmen that he has dressed up in medieval kinds of armor, but with modern weapons. And there's a castle that's buried in this whole underground thing. Like, what is this, leftover from Tyrannus or something like that? We don't really get what the backstory is here. We hear a little bit about his previous adventures against Thor. The Warlock has essentially entranced Jean so that she cannot resist him, and is, as a matter of fact, doing some work for him. But at one point, Professor X is able to play dead, basically, in a way that causes the Warlock to drop his guard or allow the professor to sort of regain his powers in order to reattack things. So the Warlock has some sort of Colosseum battle kind of thing that he has set up that, he's supposed to be watching over, like he's King Arthur and like Jean is his Guinevere. So you have all these jousts and stuff like that the X-Men are supposed to be taking part in, but they're able to defeat him and wrap him up, and they sort of take him back up to the surface, wrapped up in sort of a mummy cocoon looking thing. Meanwhile, Professor X has some kind of like little flying stingray scooter buggy thing that he picked up at one point here. And this is after, like, earlier in the issue, he had once again his mechanical legs that he hadn't had for several issues, but they show up briefly for like a few panels and then aren't a thing anymore. I just overall found this issue pretty disappointing. Oh, and Matt, so I know it's always unfair to pick out one particular panel or one particular pose and be like, can you defend that? But I'm going to do that anyway. Page 20, the splash page on page 20. Well, generally that splash page is not very good, but Beast in the lower right-hand corner.
I would say Jean is worse than Beast, but yeah, they're both pretty terrible. It's a pretty terrible big panel on the bottom of page 20. I would certainly agree with that. Yeah, I didn't love all of the art, but I loved a lot of the individual panels. And generally speaking, there's just a lot of dynamism in the art. There's a lot of foreshortening. Like, if you look at the Warlock on the bottom of page 10, I really like the foreshortening on page 10 in terms of the Warlock's hand being very close to us and then his body being further away. I just like the dynamism of the art. Things are in motion. Things are really moving. And, I like also the foreshortened hand on page 4. And I really like the Warlock's face on page 3, as I was saying before. Generally, things like this issue, I thought the issue was just action-packed. I like how the story started very late. Like, suddenly they're being already yanked up into the air when the issue begins. And then things have barely wrapped up when the issue ends. So we start late, we end early, keep the issue action-packed. I really like the art of knocking down the tower. A tower crumbling on people is a hard thing to draw, but I thought it was well drawn on page 18. Like I said, I don't know why they changed from wing horses to one-man hovercraft, but both are good designs. But why, as an artist, would you want to create all that work for yourself? Like, you've already created one thing. Why create something else from a completely different genre? Not only is this a vehicle change, this is a genre change. But I conclude, welcome change from Warner Roth is what I say at the end.
Okay. Well, I just had a couple other things I just realized I had in my notes that I had not mentioned that I just want to mention before we go on and get Bill's take on this. So at one point, the Warlock has that old chestnut of, because it pleases me, I shall explain my master plan to you when we arrive at my headquarters. It's just like, oh, okay. Now you've been around too long for that. At one point, Cyclops says to the Warlock, not so fast, Warlock. Not even a mutant can attack and defend at the same time. Like, really? Where's that rule? When they've defeated all of the medieval looking henchmen, Iceman is freezing a bunch of them in a block and saying, that ought to keep these armor plated hoods under wraps till the state police get here. I don't know, somehow state police just is one of those record scratch moments for me. I'm like, why the state police? Why not the feds? Why not the army? Why not the city? Wait, where are we? What's going on? Because we have no idea where we are in any of this. Then when they're talking about the end of the issue, Professor X says something about, for without the powerful brain of the Warlock, his time reversing machine is useless. The world of humans is safe once more. And I was just like, I don't even remember a time reversing machine being a thing in the issue. If that was a thing, it wasn't enough of a thing for me to have even noticed. Anyway, those are the last of my little details there, but that's it. So, Bill, do you have some thoughts that you would like to share?
Just some quick ones. I'll be quick. Yeah, I thought that the art was good for Jack Sparling. I kind of enjoyed it. I have to say I never enjoy John Tartaglione, unfortunately. I think I got a how to draw book when I was like 8, and it was done by John Tartaglione.
Really?
And as I looked through it, I thought, I could probably do better than about half of this book, and I'm like 8. So I was never a huge fan of his. So I think he drags it down a little, but I'm not a huge Jack Sparling fan, but I thought that the art in this was quite good. Yeah, like the scene that you just had up on that shot of the wizard, I thought was very impressive. I didn't expect much when I saw Tartaglione's name. I'm like, oh my God. But I did enjoy the art. I didn't understand the villain's name. I mean, when Jean Grey sees the winged horses, she goes, oh, it's magic. And he says, no, despite my name, there is nothing mystical about them. They are mutants. I mean, why even have the name Warlock? You were named Merlin. That was a pretty good name.
Right.
Why did you change it to Warlock if it has nothing to do with magic? I thought that was weird. And I also, maybe it's me, but there were several points in it where I wasn't quite sure what was going on exactly.
No, I don't think that's just you.
Okay. There were just several points. I'm like, wait, where are they? What's happening? And why are there medieval knights with machine guns? And what's even the point of that? And, he sees Jean for 3 seconds and wants her to be his bride or whatever for some reason.
Did he even see her for 3 seconds? It's like by the time we begin the story, he's already sucking her up into this thing to be her as his queen.
Right. I thought, did I miss something? I'm like, they just battled the super adaptoid last issue. I'm like, how does he even know Jean Grey? But immediately he's like, he hypnotizes her and he's like, you will be my bride.
Yeah.
So I thought that was kind of odd. It was entertaining. I just wasn't sure 100% what was going on. I'm not sure if that's Sparling's fault or Roy Thomas's fault exactly, but it was just a little odd. Like I said, it was entertaining. There was a lot of action. I thought Sparling's art was good, but it was just a bit baffling in some places where I couldn't get my bearings as to where exactly they were or what exactly was going on.
So,
But besides that, I enjoyed it, you know.
So, Matt, who was it that had the quote? Actually, may have been Wolk, who said that, with the X-Men, Chris Claremont had the fantastic idea of what if the X-Men wasn't the seventh book a writer wrote that month?
I once told you that Elliot Kalin said that once.
Oh, okay. Maybe that was it. So one way or the other, I'm definitely getting that feeling with this. But let's go ahead and wrap up this episode, and then we will go ahead and continue with the rest of the recording of the next episode. Thank you, everybody, for hanging out and listening to us blab on and on about these old comics. I hope that you have found them entertaining, and we will speak to you again next week. We'll be in your ear holes once again.
Okay. Thanks, everybody.
All right.
Thank you
care.
for having me.
Thanks for coming.
Thanks for coming out, Bill.
All right.
And we'll go ahead and discuss more books with you in our next episode. All right. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Take care and stay safe out there. Bye. Thanks for listening to Marvel Reread Club. Please subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. Your reviews and ratings are a great help and always appreciated. We love hearing from you. Go to marvelrereadclub.com to find notes and join the discussion about this episode. We're also on Facebook and Instagram. See you next time.